This meeting is being recorded. Good afternoon. My name is Chris Cavanero and your host for today's webinar. If by chance you miss a webinar in the future, all webinars are recorded and uploaded into SonicWall University as a course. You can access the recorded webinar at any time by clicking the Events Recorded Webinars tab on the home page of SonicWall University. We are constantly adding new webinars and content to SonicWall University and encourage you to log in often. Thank you for taking the time to attend today's SonicWall University webinar. During the webinar, if you should have any questions, please feel free to type your question in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll address them at the end of the webinar. And now I'd like to present Kelvin Peters. Kelvin, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us. I'm Kelvin Peters. I'm a Senior Solution Engineer out of California and Hawaii. Today we're going to be talking about the SonicWall Wireless Network Manager, or WNM. This also supports management of your switches as well. And as usual, if you have any feedback or any ideas for some upcoming webinars, feel free to drop me an email. The email's on the screen. Always looking for new ideas, and always welcome feedback on anything that we do put out there. We're going over the agenda, so we're briefly going to talk about the new SonicWall Wi-Fi 6 APs that have been soft launched. These devices are only currently you can only manage these devices in WNM. Support for the firewall management is to come in a later release of SonicOS 7.1. And this release doesn't have a timeline yet, but I expect this is likely going to be end of summer, beginning of fall. We're going to hit the Wi-Fi planning tool. It's always a good kind of starting point. For wireless, it's always a good idea to plan out your deployment, and we offer this free tool that allows you to essentially get that pre-planning done. And then we're going to introduce you to a basic scenario, so a sample topology with a couple of VLANs and a couple of SSIDs. So we're going to do the config on the switch, firewall, and the APs as well. We're going to talk about zones, policies, and inheritance. These are three important concepts to understand using Wireless Network Manager. We're going to onboard a new device. We're going to onboard a switch and an AP, and then we're going to go through the configuration. So if you guys are ready, sit back, and here we go. All right, introducing our new SonicWave 600 series access points. So these are just a few bullet points from the data sheet. So there's a few obviously key areas here: performance and user experience. These two offer increased throughput, reduced latency, better power management, translating to longer battery life. It's able to avoid neighboring network interference. Target wait time is also a technology that's included if you guys are familiar with Wi-Fi 6. We won't spend a lot of time. I will include the data sheet in this PDF, and we'll attach that to the recording for just for reference kind of purposes if you want to learn more specifically about the new Wi-Fi 6 devices. All right, so just kind of looking at the two models that were soft released, the 641 and the 681. You can see their specs here on the screen. Pretty much the smaller one is a 4x4, whereas the larger one's an 8x8. So there is also going to be a 621, so that will be the smaller device, and that will be a 2x2 for those of you who typically go for a smaller unit. All right, so this is the sample topology or sample setup that we will be going over. You can see a firewall, so that's an NSA 2700 at the top or 3700 at the top. And then we have a 24 port PoE switch. And then we have an access point connected to the switch. So it's getting its power and data through the port of the switch. So just kind of give you an overview here. So we have a couple of VLANs. So you can see the VLAN 100, which essentially is going to be broadcasting an SSID of main Wi-Fi. And then we do have a VLAN 200, and this will be broadcasting guest Wi-Fi SSID. And VLAN 1 is, or the native VLAN here, is essentially the management port. We could also broadcast an SSID on this one as well, but for this kind of purpose and demo, we're just going to work with these two tagged VLAN. All right, for those of you who are new to the concept of VLANs, so we're using VLANs here to essentially separate out our networks into multiple segments here. So this is going to allow us to segregate each network from one another. So this allows us to enforce security policies between these different networks. It also allows us to isolate that broadcast domain into smaller broadcast domains, right? So you'll see here, we'll come back to the VLANs when we get into the console, but this is essentially the diagram that we're going to be working off of. All right, shifting into zones and policies. So I know there's a lot going on here on the screen, but this is essentially what the zones and policies kind of look like from a 50,000 foot view. Essentially, everything is encompassed in a zone, right? So you essentially take your zone, you assign an AP policy, a switch policy, a location, and then you add in the devices that you want to be part of that zone. So any device that's part of that zone will take the policies that are specified in that zone. So the AP policy and the switch policy, in this case, would apply to any devices that you put in the zone, and that can obviously be switches and access points. You can see in the little red section, the AP policy is actually made up of a couple of other policies. One is being the SSID policy. So that's where you would configure, all your SSIDs and security. And here you can see security services. So if you do have the advanced license, you can, specify, your security policies in here. So things like content filtering, or botnet, security services like that. We'll go through the security services when we get into the console, but this is really just to kind of show you how everything is built in Wireless Network Manager. All right, so we'll talk about inheritance. This pretty much applies more to the switch side. So you can see the default switch policy that can be inherited into other policies. The recommendation here is not to, tag or specify the VLANs on the actual ports. Most of the time, when you go from switch to switch, the switches won't be identical, right? So you might have, the first 5 ports on a specific VLAN. Whereas, you might then have, on a different switch, you might have, 6 ports or 7 or 8 ports that might have the same VLAN. So, it's not going to be a kind of a cookie cut config. So I always recommend we leave that out, and you can actually specify that in another policy, right? So instead of putting it in the default switch policy, you could either put that in the actual switch policy that you'll use, or you can configure that right on the switch. So it all depends on where or how you want to cut out the policies. But we're going to get into the policies when we start to configure this setup. So all other configuration can be inherited from the default policy. So VLANs, your NTP server, admin credentials, your upgrade options, the management VLAN, etc. So this isn't a complete list, but this is some of the more important items worth mentioning. All right, we're in my SonicWall here. We're looking at the two devices that we'll be using for this setup. So we have a switch, a 24 PoE switch, and we have a SonicWave 224 access point, so a wall-mounted device. And we'll see essentially the how you onboard this. So let's go into the switch right here. So you'll see I've already flipped this to manage by, and I've changed this from on box to cloud. So you can see firewall is an option and cloud is also an option. And we have already set that to cloud. And then we have the SonicWave 224. And now you're going to see we don't actually have that same option here. So the mechanism to get the switch and the access point into Wireless Network Manager are a little differently. And we'll see that when we look at the firewall. So when you essentially add a device to the WLAN zone on the firewall, you'll see that there is a setting to accept only traffic from a SonicWave access point. This actually has to be disabled on that wireless zone on your firewall, as if you leave it enabled, the firewall will essentially intercept that traffic and your device will show up on the firewall to be managed rather than showing up in Wireless Network Manager. All right, so to get into Wireless Network Manager, we're going to hit the Capture Security Center, so you can launch it through here, or you can log into cloud.sonicwall.com. We're going to switch to that tenant that we were looking at, so let's go to the shared WNM. So let's click on this guy. All right, so once we log in, this dashboard will likely look familiar. Kind of kept it similar across all platforms. So if you're using Network Security Manager or a Gen 7 firewall, you'll likely see this as being the same look and feel. So a couple of things on the left-hand side. Obviously, we're on the dashboard, and you can see we currently have two devices. We have an access point and a switch, and you can see the devices are currently unmanaged. So we're going to get in there and show you how to, we're going to manage that. So let's go ahead and take a look. So we're going to go into, actually let's start off with the network hierarchy. So you can see we currently have a location, just a default location and a default zone, okay? We can add another zone here if we wanted to, but we're going to go into zones. So this is essentially where you get that. So you can see here we have this default zone, and if I edit this, you're going to see a lot of those pieces that I showed you in that diagram, and I'm going to pop that up here in a second on the screen. And you can see that I've tied my AP policy and my switch policy, and then this obviously has just the default location. Okay, so I could actually just use this right now. I could add my devices right here, and that way I would go, right? But what we're going to do is we're going to actually create a separate policy just to show you how all these policies kind of play out here, right? So we're going to call this one main zone. Okay, we're just going to call it main zone. Okay, we're just going to use the default location. We could have set up another location, but for this demo, we'll just use the default. And you'll see here, we don't have any options to change the AP policy or the switch policy. So we're going to click on OK here. But what we're going to do is we're going to head over to the AP policy and the switch policy, and we're going to come back here, and we're going to modify this once we have the other policies in place. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go over and we're going to first create an SSID policy. Okay, so going back to that diagram that we had originally, essentially we had two SSIDs. So one was main Wi-Fi and the second one was guest Wi-Fi, and those were both on two separate VLANs, VLAN 100 and VLAN 200. Okay, so you'll see we have this default policy already set up. So if we actually use this, it will be, I end up broadcasting the default SSID of SonicWall with a default password of password. But that's essentially not what we want. So what we're going to do is we're going to just create a new set here. All right, so now we have a main policy, but you can see we don't have any SSIDs under it. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on add here, and we're going to call the first one main Wi-Fi. All right, we'll put this up, give it 128 clients, and we'll go down here and we'll just put in a super secret password. And we're going to tag the VLAN. So you can see this is our main Wi-Fi. So down at the bottom, we're going to specify a VLAN of 100. As you can see, originally the default was 0. So if we left it at 0, that would actually, drop the device onto the native VLAN. So traditionally VLAN 1 in most cases. So that's essentially, for our purpose, we need VLAN 100 here. So everything looks good. So we can essentially click on save here. All right, we're going to repeat this. So once we get this to save, we're going to go back in and we're going to add in the second SSID. So the second one was the guest Wi-Fi. And we're going to leave that at 32. And then at the bottom here, we're going to put in in a password, and this was going to be on VLAN 200, right? So what we'll do is we're going to go up here. I'll just show you the guest portal. So what you can do is you can use this is essentially our guest network. So you have a couple of options. So you can have a click through where the user essentially is just prompted with a page where they click the button, so they accept the terms of agreement. And then essentially, they get access, right? We did put a pre-shared key on this wireless, so it's not, entirely open. So someone would still need to know the SSID PSK in order to even get this far, right? You can also do external authentication. So you can see, there's a variety of different ways to get these authenticated, these users authenticated. So you can use the lightweight hotspot messaging protocol, right? So you can point these to different authentication servers to do the authentication. One other interesting thing, you can actually just enable a social account. So the user will log in with one of these four social media accounts. You can also have the user sign in with a local user or a Radius, LDAP, Active Directory, a one-time password, or SAML. I'm going to choose the one-time password, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to add email and SMS here. So what happens here, when you'll see when I'll actually show you here, we'll try to log in, but you'll see the user will be prompted to either specify their email or SMS, and it will send them a one-time password that they enter into the portal page that they get when they try and log in. Okay, so we're going to see that afterwards once we get this all set up. So I'm going to click on save here. All right, so pretty much our Wi-Fi or SSID policy is set up. So we're going to go into the AP policy now, and we're going to create a new policy. So you can see here, this is where you specify that new SSID policy. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And you can, see right off the bat here the two SSIDs that I just set up. Right. So as soon as you change the policy, this at the bottom will essentially update, and you actually have the ability to turn these on and off. This is also where you apply these security settings, as I mentioned. If you bought the advanced access point license, it comes with content filtering, capture ATP, AV, ACLs, GeoIP and botnet, and app control. One other interesting thing here is you see this SSL VPN option, so you can actually take an access point, put it in an obscure location, and actually, have it VPN back to another device. So you could have it, a VPN back to a SonicWall firewall or an SMA secure mobile access VPN device, right? So a few different kind of use cases for that. Where you can, take an access point. Maybe it's, you have some sort of conference with a large number of, employees attending. You can essentially, bring one of these devices, and users will connect just like they would as if they were in the actual office. Okay. So you can see that you can figure this up here. We won't set this up, but you can especially just specify the user password and then the VPN type, right? So let's go back to general here. Oh, actually, let me turn that off. All right, so we've specified our SSID policy within our AP policy. Okay, and we can, set up different settings on the AP policy. The admin user, password, etc. Different, radio settings, right? So. You can, change these settings. Beacon interval is probably something we'd want to change because we have more than one SSID on this one, right? So typically you change this to somewhere around 100 per SSID. So 200 makes sense for us. And we're going to click on OK. All right, so now we have the access points pretty much set up. So let's go over to the switch. And again, we're going to create ourselves a new switch policy. So let's call this one the main switch policy. So here you have the opportunity, to set password. You can add more accounts. You also have this auto upgrade feature. This is one of those features where it's up to you and your environment. A lot of people obviously would opt to disable this. Typically you update your infrastructure during a scheduled maintenance window, so you certainly don't want this to just kind of auto update as it becomes available. You can see you can specify at least a day and a time. So if if your patching window is always Sunday at 2 a.m. or something, you can, specify that here, and then it'll just update, on its own, right? You can configure an SNMP server, and this is also where you can set up the native VLAN for your switch. You can see one is the default here. And you can see, these are all currently being inherited from the default policy, right? So whatever has been set in the default policy will show up here unless I disable inheritance right from here, right? So again, site-specific settings kind of belong in the default policy. Then you get down to this one where now you might have a little less specific, right? And then when you get down to the actual device, that's where even putting VLANs on the actual switch port probably makes sense, right? And we'll set it up in that way. You'll see essentially what I'm talking about. So, all right. So I have a 24 port PoE switch. So let's go in here, and add 2 more VLANs that we will need. So VLAN 100, which is the main Wi-Fi. And we won't associate this to any ports right now. We're going to look at that on the actual switch itself, just to kind of show you how you can essentially, use a template or config policy here multiple times, right, without having too much information in it, because that essentially will prevent you from recycling this config, right? But obviously defining the VLANs that are on the switch, kind of makes sense, right? So this last one is guest Wi-Fi. And we'll click on save. And okay. All right, so that's all done. So we essentially have all of the policies created. Now all we have to do is go back to the zones, and then in the zone, we're going to specify the new policies that we did create. So there's the new AP policy for the access points, and there's the main switch policy for the switches. And while we're in here, we're gonna also add in our access point and switch. So if you had multiple devices here, you could add in multiple switches, multiple access points. I only have one of each here, but you can add multiple devices into the same zone here. So let's click on OK, and then we'll give it a moment, and those 2 devices should essentially appear online. So let's go back here and give it a few seconds. All right, so you can see the access point has come online, and the switch as well. So we only have one more piece of config that we need to do, and that's on the actual switch. We need to assign that VLAN to those ports. So let's head on over to the VLAN config, and we'll make these changes. All right, so let's go into VLAN, and then we're going to edit this guy. So essentially my access point's connected on port 1, and my uplink to the firewall is on port 14. So essentially I need to ensure both VLANs are being tagged on those 2 ports. So essentially I'm setting that up now, and that should be it. All right, so once that saves, we should have something that's working. I've already did some config on the firewall, so let me just kind of come over here and show you what this looks like. So let's go to the network interfaces. I'm going to show you, we have port 14 connected from the firewall, this 3700. We have port 14 connected to port 14 on the switch. And you can see here we've created 2 virtual interfaces here, and we've given them an IP. Okay, these 3 ranges here, the 192.168.11, the 100, and the 200. There is also a corresponding DHCP scope to hand out IPs to clients who connect to those SSIDs, or in this case, this is the management. So this is the subnet that essentially gets assigned to the physical devices. Okay. Also, let's go to policy. I'll also show you I have an access rule I created, and essentially in the zones I have the WLAN guest, and I have the WLAN main Wi-Fi. Okay, so the WLAN main Wi-Fi, I'm just going to show you one of these so you can see I've disabled all these auto-generate rules so that I can go in and specify the rules. And this is the setting I was talking about. If you're managing the APs with Wireless Network Manager, you would disable the management on the specific zone. All right. So that's what the zone looks like. And like I said, we have a DHCP scope here. So if I go to DHCP server, You can see I have a scope for 11, 100, and 200. And you can also see, if we look in here, we can see our sonic wave is actually getting an IP on each of those VLANs, as well as our switch getting a VLAN or an IP from the management VLAN, native VLAN. So that's essentially the setup. Let's go back to here. All right, so this should be working. So let's test it out. We have a client behind here, so let's just maximize this. And let's see if we can see those two SSIDs now in the list here. So we have the guest Wi-Fi. We see we have the main Wi-Fi. So let's try and connect to the main Wi-Fi first and see if that is working for us. All right, so it's showing we're connected. So let's, and that was the main Wi-Fi, so let's test this out. Yeah, and so looks like we have internet, and we got essentially a connection on that network. All right, let's try the guest Wi-Fi as well. So let's click on that. And we should get redirected here. And there we go. So we get that splash page just like we expected on the guest Wi-Fi. And we have the two options that we specified. So we can go SMS or email. So let's go ahead with email. All right. There's the password. It didn't take too long. All right. And now we're on, so as you can see, we're on the guest network. And we authenticated using that one-time token. All right, back over here. One other thing we wanted to explore essentially is the Wi-Fi planner, right? So Wi-Fi. It's important to have a pre-planning exercise. This tool, I mean, obviously it's a passive tool. I mean, obviously if you're actively scanning it on site, obviously a more realistic survey. But this, does help you, and it, gets you even, from the sales perspective when you're, trying to figure out how many APs do I actually need, right? So here we can see we already have a project set up. So let's just go ahead and click on open. So I've already, worked on this a little bit. Obviously, one of the first things is you can upload an image. You can also upload a Google Map. So if you're, just doing it from, from the outside kind of perspective, you can essentially do that as well. One thing is obviously you need to, set a scale. So it's good that this one has, a scale already defined. So we can, use one of these rulers here to define the scale in the tool. If you don't have a scale, typically a door opening, we usually, say, a door opening is an average of 36 inches or 3 feet. So you can always use that to set your scale as well. So what you can see here is, I've gone ahead and drawn out some different material, right? So glass and some drywall and some concrete walls, etc. So I mean, it's good to draw this out, so that this is also the setting that I mentioned previously. So if you're managing the devices on, so one of the signal strength to -65, you can see there's a note here. -65 and above is recommended for voice and streaming. So it's good to put that down to -65. You'll see when it does the map and the heat map, you'll see where signal drops off. So we go ahead and run this, and you'll see this doesn't take very long at all, and it's going to auto place a few access points in a kind of the best location. And you can see, you can drag these around, if you want. So you can, if you think that there's probably more. This is a more dense area. You can always, move them as you kind of see fit in the area, right? So this is a really nice tool. Again, it's free. If you don't have wireless, if you don't have access to wireless network manager, you can always get through it through my SonicWall. There's a link under tools for the same Wi-Fi planner, so you have access to it from kind of two spots. This also allows you to generate a report, and what this will do is it'll download the heat map. It'll figure out all your square footage. It'll show you the AP placement, tell you the AP channel selection for each frequency, and it'll tell you what the power level should look like on the access point as well. It also has some advanced features, so if you want to set up a mesh network, you can certainly do so. And for any of the access points that have external antennas, it actually allows you to go in there and swap out the antenna for a different gain antenna. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining. If you guys have any questions, just feel free to drop them in the Q&A box. I think we had one that came in. So the question was, are there any plans to add the essentially any firewall management support for the Wi-Fi 6 devices for Gen 6? So the answer is, I don't think they have plans for that. You certainly never know. But I think the Gen 6 line will likely not see support for Wi-Fi 6 coming anytime soon. So the next question, several features in wireless network management that we don't see in the firewall. One is SAML authentication. And I guess the expectation is maybe these would come in 7.1 release of the Sonic OS firmware. I don't think so. SAML authentication was something that was planned for 7.1. That actually dropped off the roadmap. So I don't think we'll see specifically the SAML authentication coming in 7.1. All right, we'll give it a few more moments to see if we get any more questions come in here. And if you guys do have any questions after the fact, feel free to drop me an email. I always like to receive email. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. So. All right, pass that back to you, Christine. Oh, actually, wait, we got another question that just came in. Yeah, so the question is, once the support for managing the firewall comes out in 7.1, and the decision is to move the device back to the firewall, are there any issues? I don't see any issues. Obviously, one thing is you have to drop them out of the policy or the zone, right? So you would definitely remove them from the zone. And then essentially would just enable that setting on the zone on your firewall to manage the devices, and they should show up on your firewall. Right? All right, I don't see any other questions coming in, so I'll pass this back to Christine.
Thank you, Kelvin. And we'd like to thank everyone for attending today. This meeting is ended, and you may now disconnect. Have a great day.